The day Cassian Holt stopped counting was the 43rd day. He'd kept track up to that point with a kind of dogged precision that felt, in the early weeks, like a moral duty, a small act of survival. He'd scratched the numbers into the composite paneling above the sleep bay with the spine of a stylus because the ship's internal chronometer had gone dark along with everything else when the Veridine's drive core ruptured. He kept the count because stopping felt like surrender, and Cassian Holt did not surrender easily. But on the 43rd day, the stylus snapped. He stared at the broken piece in his palm for a long time. The emergency lighting painted everything in amber and shadow. The air recycler was making a sound it had never made in the first 2 weeks, a faint, high catch, like something trying to breathe through cloth, and he'd been conserving oxygen output by keeping himself still, moving slowly, thinking in long, unhurried loops. He ate half rations. He drank recycled water that tasted of plastic and the particular mineral memory of 1,000 other breaths. He'd read every document on the one functioning personal tablet twice, then read them again. He put the broken stylus down. He did not scratch another mark. He told himself it didn't matter the count. He told himself the number was arbitrary, a tool for managing time, and if the tool was gone, the time went on regardless. He believed this mostly. What he didn't believe was that the number itself had kept him company in a way he hadn't admitted until it was gone. 42. 43. A pair of facts that updated themselves each morning when he crawled to the wall and made the mark, giving him a small, reliable task in a situation where reliable tasks were becoming scarce. He sat with the broken stylus for a while. Then he set it on the edge of the bunk and lay back and looked at the ceiling and thought about his crew, which was something he did in controlled intervals, a few minutes at a time, deliberate, never letting it run. Yeva, Joran, the 5 who died on the Veridine when the containment failed. He'd known all of them well enough to know their habits, who drank too much of the bad coffee, who hummed while they worked, who was likely to be the last one at the table telling a story everyone had heard twice. Yeva had kept giving him updates on the engine output with the specific brightness of someone who genuinely found engine output interesting. Joran had known 3 chords on an instrument Cassian couldn't name and played them often. He did his few minutes with them, methodically, then he put them away and got up. The Veridine had been a survey vessel, a mid-range intercolonial authority research ship running a deep cartography passed through the outer merit system, the kind of mission that generated good data and mild professional satisfaction, and very little drama. Cassian was the mission's lead astrophysicist, which meant he spent his days staring at spectral analysis outputs and writing reports no one would read for 6 months. There'd been a crew of 7. They'd been 11 weeks into a 14-week run when the drive core ruptured. The explosion had been quiet, which was the thing that stayed with him. He'd expected noise. Instead, there was a low concussive thud through the hull plating, a sound less heard than felt in the chest, and then the lights went to Amber and Yevaresh. The ship's engineer said over comms in a voice that was very careful, "Everyone get to emergency stations." By the time he'd reached the bridge, 3 of his crewmates were already in the shuttle. He made it in. Joran, the pilot, made it in. Yeva herself was last, climbing through the hatch with her left hand wrapped around something she'd grabbed from the engine compartment, moving fast, too fast, not looking back, and she pressed it into Cassian's hands as the shuttle detached. A portable emergency beacon, military grade, the kind that burned a compressed signal on a galactic council-monitored frequency. The casing was warm from wherever she'd been holding it. "Burn it every 12 hours, she said. "They'll come." Then the hatch sealed and the shuttle pushed away from the Veridine, and the Veridine's secondary containment failed, and the shuttle's rear cameras caught a bloom of light that was over before Cassian could look away. They drifted for 9 days, before the shuttle's oxygen recycler failed. He'd gotten Joran into the one emergency hardsuit before the air became non-viable. Joran hadn't made it anyway, a punctured lung from a shard of interior panel during the initial blast, slow bleeding in a way that didn't announce itself until day 6. He'd been unconscious by day 8. By day 9, Cashin was alone in a dead shuttle, in a hard suit that had 14 hours of supplemental oxygen, with a military-grade beacon he'd been burning every 12 hours for over a week. He'd crawled back to the Veridine through the external access port, moving hand over hand along the hull in a suit whose thrusters had 3% fuel left, which he saved for the final approach. The ship's emergency system still had power, not much, but enough. The life support still worked, at reduced capacity. There was food in the galley lockers. There was water. There was the amber light and the sound the recycler made on its bad days and the long corridors of a ship that had been built for 7. He'd been there 43 days when the stylus broke. On day 44, he moved the sleep bay mattress to the observation deck, because the observation port was the largest unobstructed viewport on the ship, and at least out here he could watch the stars. It wasn't a strategic decision. It was the kind of decision a man makes when he is no longer performing survival for an audience and has started simply living it, one careful hour at a time. He dragged the mattress down 2 corridors in the amber light and dropped it under the port and lay down and looked up and let the stars do what they did, which was nothing, exactly, which was everything he needed. The beacon kept burning, every 12 hours without exception. He never missed a cycle, and he was not sure on the harder days whether it was discipline or simply the last piece of structure he had, but he kept it regardless because Yeva had told him to, and that was sufficient reason. He was on the observation deck, watching a particular cluster of stars he'd privately named the Knuckles because of the way they sat against the dark, when the Aravith ship came out of fold space. He heard it before he saw it, a pressure shift in the hull, a faint harmonic that traveled through the metal and into the mattress he was lying on. He'd learned the vocabulary of the ship's sounds over 44 days, and this one was new. He was upright before he'd consciously decided to move, crossing to the observation port in 3 strides. The ship that had arrived was nothing like any intercolonial authority vessel he'd ever seen. It was larger than the Veridine, but built with a different logic. A flowing, almost biological curvature to the hull, metallic surfaces that shaded from deep violet to silver, depending on angle, sensor arrays, arranged in paired clusters that reminded him of eyes. Running lights pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm. It was holding station approximately 200 meters off the Veridine's port side, which meant whoever was flying it was either very precise or possessed of instruments that rendered precision effortless. Cashin stared at it for 11 seconds. Then he went to the comms panel, the short-range emergency unit, the only comm still functioning, and keyed it open on the Galactic Council's standard hailing frequency. "This is Dr. Cashin Holt of the ICA survey vessel Veridine," he said. His voice came out steady. He was surprised by that. "Sole survivor, day 44, I am receiving you visually. Please respond." Static, then a sound that wasn't static, a carrier tone, modulating. Then a voice. It was a woman's voice or something that worked like one, precise, slightly formal. Speaking standard with an accent he couldn't place. Consonants slightly more deliberate than a native speaker's. Vowels that were perfect in a way that felt considered rather than natural. "Dr. Holt, I am receiving you. My designation is Sailvorn. I am a primary rescue operative deployed by the Aravith Cooperative in response to your emergency beacon. I am requesting permission to dock with your vessel." Cashin let out a breath that took everything with it. "Permission granted," he said. "Permission enthusiastically granted." She came through the external coupling port with the fluid efficiency of someone who had performed the maneuver many times. He heard the coupling clamps engage, the pressure seal complete, the inner hatch cycle, and then she was in the corridor, and he was standing at the end of it, and he had to stop himself from simply reaching out and gripping her arm to confirm she was real. She was not human. He knew, intellectually, that an Aravith ship would carry Aravith crew, and he'd interacted with Aravith personnel before, at council stations, at the intercolonial ports, in the way that diplomats and scientists and logistics officers met across species lines in the polite bureaucratic fashion of institutions that needed each other. He'd sat across conference tables from Aravith trade delegates. He'd shared a research briefing once with an Aravith cartographer whose work overlapped with his own, and they'd had a short, collegial conversation about deep field survey methodology that he remembered with considerable warmth. But he'd never been alone on a dead ship for 44 days and had an Aravith operative walk through his corridor, and the reality of her, the specific physical reality of another person, breathing, moving, occupying space, landed differently than any prepared professional interaction ever had. He'd thought sometimes, toward the end of the longer days, that he'd managed isolation well. He'd thought this with a kind of professional pride, as though surviving something was a performance he was giving for an invisible audience. Standing in the corridor watching her come through the hatch, he understood for the first time how much of his management had been performance, and how entirely unnecessary the pretense now was. She stood perhaps 5 centimeters taller than him. Her skin was a pale silver blue, the color of a sky an hour before dawn, and her eyes were a deep, still amber that caught the emergency lighting and gave it back as something warmer. Her hair was dark, almost black, worn close to her skull in precise geometric layers. Her face was, he found himself searching for the right descriptor and arriving at composed, which was accurate but incomplete, because there was something behind the composition, some quality he couldn't immediately name. She was wearing a rescue operative suit, functional, dark, bearing the Aravith cooperative sigil on the left shoulder, but there were visible modifications along her forearms and at her collar. Not armor exactly, integrated systems. Where a human operative might carry a wrist-mounted scanner, the scanner appeared to be part of her. A faint blue luminescence ran in a thin line along the outer edge of her forearm, where the suit's cuff met her skin, and her left eye held a concentric ring of light inside the amber that pulsed, very slowly, as she looked at him. Cybernetic augmentation, standard among high-level Aravith specialists, he'd read the briefings. The cooperative valued efficiency, and their elite operatives were integrated with their instruments rather than merely equipped with them. She looked at him with the direct attention of someone conducting a preliminary assessment, which he suspected was exactly what she was doing. "Dr. Holt, not a question. You appear ambulatory and cognitively oriented. Are you experiencing any acute medical symptoms?" "I'm dehydrated and I've lost some muscle mass," he said. "Nothing acute. Are you alone?" A brief pause, less than a second. "I am the sole operative on this mission. The Veridine's coordinates placed it at the edge of the Aravith Cooperative's response radius. I was the nearest available qualified asset." "Then I'm very glad you were available." He paused. "I'm also glad you exist. I wasn't certain by this point." Something moved across her face. Subtle, the composed surface didn't break, but something was there. She looked at him for a moment longer than a professional assessment required. "I will need to conduct a full medical evaluation," she said, "and the ship's status needs to be logged before we depart. The cooperative's protocol requires." "I'll tell you everything you need," Cashin said. "Just come in. I'll make you something. I still have tea. It's not good tea, but it exists." She looked at him again, with that quality he couldn't name. "Tea would be acceptable," she said. Her name, she explained in the galley, sitting across from him at the small fold-down table while he heated water that took forever because the heating elements were on reduced power, was Sale Vorn. Family designation Vorn, personal designation Sale. She had been a primary rescue operative with the Aravith Cooperative for 11 years. She specialized in single-operative long-range recovery missions, which were, she told him with a kind of precision that stopped just short of self-deprecation, exactly as solitary as they sounded. "Do you do this often?" he asked. "Find someone alone on a dead ship?" "The specific parameters vary," she said. "But the fundamental condition, one survivor, extended isolation, marginal life support, is not uncommon. You managed yours well. The beacon protocol was correctly maintained. Your resource conservation showed good discipline." "I ran out of things to count," he said. She looked at him. "The marks above the sleep bay," he said. "I was keeping track of days. The stylus broke on day 43. And after that, I moved my mattress to the observation deck and watched the stars." A pause. "Why the stars?" "Because they don't need anything from me," he said. "I could just look at them. They weren't a task." She was quiet for a moment. Her augmented eye pulsed its slow rhythm. The luminescence along her forearm was steadier here in the galley, in the warmer amber light, and he noticed for the first time that it wasn't uniform. There was a faint pattern in it, a structure he couldn't quite read, but that suggested language or code. "That is a reasonable adaptation," she said. "Maintaining psychological stability in isolation without observable goals requires a recalibration of what constitutes meaningful activity. Passive observation is underutilized as a stabilization technique." He looked at her across the table. "You sound like you know something about it." Something happened behind her composed expression. "I have studied the literature," she said, and that was all. She drank the tea. He watched her drink it with the faintly helpless fascination of someone who had been alone for 6 weeks, and would have been equally fascinated watching anyone do anything ordinary. She held the cup with both hands, an Aravith gesture of courtesy. He'd read once, or perhaps simply a personal habit, and she looked at the tea rather than at him for a moment, and the augmented eye pulsed its slow rhythm, and he had the impression she was tasting it with more than her tongue. "What does the augmentation read from something like tea?" he asked. She looked up. "Chemical composition, temperature, projected metabolic value." A pause. "Also in this case, a flagged notation that the caffeine content is below the standard threshold for a human restorative beverage, which suggests it has been stored in conditions that degraded it." "The galley temperature regulation failed on day 12, he said. "I did what I could." "It is still tea," she said, and drank more of it, and something in the way she said it made him feel, for the first time in 44 days, that the situation was not irredeemably grim. He asked her about the cooperative while she finished the cup. She answered in the same precise, slightly formal standard. The Aravith Cooperative maintained a network of long-range response assets across the outer colonial zones. They coordinated with the ICA on treaty-adjacent operations. Their rescue mandate was genuine, she said, not contingent on political or scientific benefit. He believed her. He would continue to believe her on this point, through everything that came later. She had long, careful fingers. He noticed this while she was drinking the tea, and filed it as data with the same scrupulous fairness he applied to all data, and did not draw conclusions from it. "How long before we can depart?" he asked. 2 days. The cooperative's salvage and survivor protocols require a full ship survey and documentation. Some of the Veridine's data will be important for the ICA's accident investigation. 2 days, he said. "That's fine." He looked at the table. "It's been 44, 2 more is nothing." She looked at him with that quality still unnamed, still unresolved in his mental catalog. "It is not nothing," she said. 2 additional days of survivable conditions after 44 is a meaningful ratio. You should receive it as something, even if it is small. He looked at her across the salvaged tea in the amber light. "All right," he said. "I receive it as something." The protocols took 2 days. He hadn't realized there would be protocols. He'd assumed rescue meant departure, immediate and uncomplicated. But the Aravith Cooperative had procedures for salvage classification, survivor documentation, vessel status logging, and cargo manifest transfer that were thorough to the point of meditative. Sale moved through the Veridine with methodical calm, scanning every section, noting every system status, recording every data point the ship's passive logs had stored. She did not ask him to assist, but she did not discourage it when he followed. He followed. He'd been alone for 44 days. He would have followed a particularly determined maintenance drone if one had shown up. But it wasn't only that. He recognized this with the objectivity of a man who studied systems for a living, genuinely interested in her. Not in the way of 44 days of isolation manifesting as proximity attachment, though he couldn't rule that out as a contributing factor. More than that, she moved through the dead ship with an attention that felt personal rather than procedural, as though every damaged section meant something to her specifically. She paused in the corridor outside the engine compartment for a long moment and said nothing. She stood in the doorway of the crew quarters for a similar moment and was also silent. He didn't prompt her during those moments. He stood behind her and waited, and she came back to herself, or to her professional register, which might have been the same thing, and continued. He wondered what the augmentation read from a dead ship, whether it returned data, or whether a space that had once held living people and now held only their things produced some quality that the sophisticated machinery of her integrated systems found worth pausing over. On the first morning, she asked him to walk her through the sequence of the accident, not for the debrief, she said, that would be at the station, but for the survey log. She needed to understand the event in context. He told her. He told it the way he'd been telling it in his head for 44 days, in the careful, orderly way that kept it a sequence of events rather than a wait, and she listened with her full attention, and her augmented eye was very still. When he finished, she said nothing for a moment. "Yavaresh," she said, "the engineer, she gave you the beacon." "Yes." She made a choice about resource allocation. In that moment, that was quite clear. She knew what the secondary containment was going to do, he said. She had about 90 seconds. She decided I was the one who should have the beacon. Sale was quiet. She was correct, she said finally, which was not the reassurance he'd expected. It was simply the conclusion, stated without sentiment, and it landed more solidly than sentiment would have. She was correct, he agreed. He showed her the marks above the sleep bay. She looked at them for a long time, the rows of scratches, 43 of them, stopping mid-row, and said nothing. But she raised her hand and ran one finger, very lightly, along the last completed row, not touching the marks, tracing the air above them, and he understood that she was doing something with her full system in that gesture, reading something that wasn't available to unaugmented attention. "What do you get from it?" he asked. "The accumulation," she said. "Every mark is a decision. 43 decisions in sequence to continue. The record of them is," she stopped. "In Aravith there is a term, velketh, the weight of chosen continuation, actions that take nothing exceptional and make them extraordinary through repetition." She lowered her hand. "Your wall has velketh." He looked at the marks. "It's just scratches," he said. "Yes," she said. "That is exactly what velketh is." On the second day, cataloging the cargo bay, she paused in front of the row of empty specimen lockers along the far wall, the kind used for storing geological samples and biological collections from survey sites, and stood there for long enough that he noticed. "Are you running something?" he asked. "No," she turned back to the cargo manifest. "I was thinking about something." "You can think and run protocol simultaneously, can't you?" "Yes." "So what were you thinking about?" She looked at him with her amber eyes and the slow-pulsing ring of light inside them. "How it looks," she said. "A ship that was built for people. That still has all the evidence of the people who were on it, the personal items in the crew quarters, the names on the specimen lockers, the tea that someone kept buying even though the galley notes suggest at least 2 of your crewmates didn't drink it." She paused. And now there's only you. It looks like something that lost people. Ships shouldn't look like that." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "they shouldn't." She went back to the manifest. But she didn't put up the composed expression again for several minutes, and he noticed that too. On the evening of the second day, after she had filed the last of the protocols, and the departure window had been confirmed for the following morning, he found her in the observation deck. She was lying on his mattress. Not in any relaxed or casual way, she was on her back with her arms at her sides, very still in the precise posture of someone who had decided to do a thing deliberately and was doing it deliberately. Her eyes were open. The augmented eye pulsed its slow rhythm. She was watching the stars. He stopped in the doorway. She didn't turn her head. "I hope this is acceptable," she said. "The observation port is the best unobstructed viewport on the ship, and I wanted to see what you saw." "It's fine." He came and sat against the wall next to the mattress, drawing his knees up. "What do you see?" "Stars," she said, "which I am of course familiar with, but I think the specific quality you described, being able to look at something that doesn't need anything from you, requires direct experience rather than theoretical understanding." A pause. "I have been trying to experience it directly." "Is it working?" A longer pause, somewhat. He looked at the observation port. The knuckles were there, where they always were. He'd come to think of them with a kind of fond familiarity he recognized as entirely one-sided and didn't particularly care about. "You don't work in teams," he said. "Single operative long-range missions, that's what you said." "That's correct." "By design or by assignment?" Another pause, not the efficient pause of someone processing data. A considered pause, the kind that meant the question had landed somewhere real. "Both," she said. "It suits my configuration. The augmentation I carry is extensive. Integration at this level requires significant processing allocation. In team environments, other operatives sometimes find it." She stopped. "Unsettling," he suggested. "They find me difficult to read," she said carefully. "The integrated systems change the way I process and respond. My response latency is different. My attention management is different. I am monitoring things that biological operatives are not monitoring, which means my attention is sometimes elsewhere, in ways that register as inattention when it is not." She looked at the stars. "Single operative work removes the variable." "The variable being other people's discomfort." "Yes." Cashin was quiet for a moment. "Does that bother you?" "It is an accurate assessment of conditions," she said. "Not everything that is accurate needs to bother me." "That's a very composed answer." She turned her head to look at him, and he saw something move in her expression, something that was not composition, not assessment, not procedure. "I practice," she said. And for the first time since she'd walked through his hatch, he heard something that sounded like rye, and it sounded like it hadn't been let out in a long time. They left the Veridine the next morning. Her ship was a cooperative-class long-range response vessel named the Vel Sarath, which she told him translated, approximately, as asterisk something that finds what is lost. The interior was designed for a single operative, a cockpit sized for one, a medical bay, a small common space, one sleep bay. She gave him the sleep bay without discussion and set up a rest configuration in the cockpit. The transit to the nearest ICA receiving station would take 6 days. On the first day, he slept for 14 hours. He hadn't slept like that since before the accident, the accumulated weight of 44 days of light, careful sleep pressing down all at once, and the specific quality of sleeping on a ship that was moving, going somewhere, with someone else at the controls who did not need him to stay alert. It was the first time since the accident that he'd been able to truly release the watch. He hadn't known how much of himself he'd been using to hold it. When he woke, she had left a tray outside the sleep bay door. Real food, synthesized but warm, with a level of protein calibration that suggested she had run a metabolic assessment while he was unconscious. He brought the tray to the common space and found her at the small fold-down table, running what appeared to be a maintenance cycle on one of her integrated systems. The forearm panel was open, the luminescence shifting through diagnostic sequences, and she was monitoring it with the focus of someone entirely absorbed. It was the first time he'd seen her unguarded, or as close to it as he could judge. The composure was still there in the bones of her posture, but the attention was elsewhere, internal, in a way that meant she was not simultaneously managing how she appeared to him. He set down his tray quietly. She noticed him anyway. He suspected she would always notice him, through the suite, whatever her attention was doing. Metabolic recovery from extended near-insufficiency requires prioritized protein intake for approximately 72 hours, she said. I calibrated based on your baseline readings. Thank you, he sat down. Is that a diagnostic you're running? Maintenance. The long-fold transit used more processing allocation than projected. She closed the panel with care, a gesture that felt practiced, habitual, like someone buttoning a cuff. The luminescence settled back to its regular slow pulse. The augmentation requires periodic recalibration when operating at extended range. Does it take long? Approximately 4 hours for a full recalibration. I run it in segments between other tasks. She looked at her forearm for a moment after the panel closed, a brief, internal glance. It is a little like a recalibration that has to be done when you are still, like stretching a working joint. Does it hurt? She considered the question with genuine attention. There is a register I receive during it that is not comfortable. I would not call it pain, but it is present. A pause. I do not mention this to draw attention to it. I mention it because you asked a precise question and it deserved a precise answer. I appreciate precise answers, he said. I know, she said, and then very slightly, I have been reading your register. He looked at her. What does that mean? Specifically, what does it look like from your end? She looked at him with the considering quality he'd started to recognize. Like she was deciding how much the question deserved, and also, he thought, like she was deciding how much she wanted to give him. What does it do? He asked. The full suite, I mean. What are you integrated with? Navigation analysis, she said. Long-range communications, medical diagnostics, environmental reading, computational support for situational modeling. A pause. More than that, but those are the primary operational functions. More than that, he repeated. Some of it is difficult to describe in standard. The cooperative uses terms that don't translate directly. She looked at her forearm where the panel had been. There are functions that are more like processing the quality of a situation rather than specific data within it. Emotional register, social context. The difference between what a person is saying and what they mean. You can read that continuously. In most interactions, yes. He thought about that. The food in front of him was good, actual good, seasoned and calibrated in a way that the Veridine's emergency rations had not been. And he ate for a moment while he thought about it, because he was also very hungry. So you always knew I was managing, he said. On the ship, you knew how I actually was. Yes, she held his gaze steadily. You were considerably more precarious than your responses indicated, but you were also genuinely stable in the way that mattered. You hadn't decided to stop. A pause that was very brief but felt weighted. I have responded to survivors who had decided to stop. The difference is clear. And you didn't say anything. You weren't asking me to. She said it simply, without apology. You were performing sufficient function. You had your own system working. Naming the gap between your performed function and your actual state would have been intrusive. You hadn't asked for that. He looked at her. That's very careful of you. I try to be. Do people usually appreciate it, the carefulness? A pause that was not quite a sigh but had the quality of one. The people who know about the full suite often find it unsettling. The idea that I am reading them continuously, without their awareness of it, without being asked. She looked at the table. There is a version of my situation that is not comfortable for other people. I carry instruments for perceiving things that they cannot choose whether to present. It feels, to some, like a violation of a private space. I don't find it unsettling, he said. She looked at him with that quality, the one he still hadn't named, still hadn't fully placed. Most people say that initially, she said, before they have time to consider it. I've had 44 days of considering what matters, he said. You walked through a door and I didn't die. Whatever else you do with your attention, that's the foundational fact. She was quiet. The luminescence along her forearm pulsed once, and he noticed, for the first time, that it changed cadence when she was still, when she was processing the quality of a situation rather than running an operational function. It was slower and less regular and somehow more present. He ate the rest of his food and thought about the fact that she was reading him, and found that he didn't mind. He was, he realized, already reading her, had been reading her since she walked through the hatch, watching the thing behind the composure, the quality that surfaced and retreated, the pulsing light that was more honest than her words without being less honest than her words. They were, it seemed, reading each other. There was a kind of fairness in that. On the third day, he found what he hadn't been meant to find. It wasn't deliberate. He'd woken in the middle of the ship's rest cycle with the particular alertness of someone whose sleep rhythms were still recalibrating, and gone to the common space for water, and found the door to the cockpit open by a fraction. The sound coming through it was very faint. He almost didn't register it as intentional. But it was a voice, her voice. She was speaking in Aravith, which he didn't know, so the words were nothing to him. But the tone was something he'd studied, in the way that a man who had spent 44 days learning the sound of a ship the way you learn the sound of the person sleeping in the next room would study something. The tone was careful, measured, like someone managing something. He stood in the corridor for a moment and listened to the measured voice he couldn't understand and thought about what she'd said. More than that, the functions that are more like processing the quality of a situation. He went back to the sleep bay. He didn't press. But in the morning, he brought it. You were talking to someone last night, he said. It wasn't an accusation. He kept his voice even. She looked at him. Her composed surface was fully in place. The cooperative requires periodic status reports from operatives in transit. Status reports, he said, at the ship's rest cycle. The timing is calibrated to the cooperative central processing schedule. She met his eyes. Is there something you want to ask me directly? He sat down. Are you in contact with someone about me? All recovery missions are logged and reported, she said. Your status is part of the mission report. That's not what I asked. A pause, the longest pause she had given him. No, she said, it isn't. He waited. She looked at him for a long moment, the amber eyes, the slow pulsing ring, the forearm luminescence running its quiet diagnostic. And then she set down the data unit she was holding and folded her hands on the table. There is something I should tell you, she said. I had intended to wait until we reached the station and the mission was formally complete. It would have been procedurally cleaner. But I have been reading your register continuously for 4 days, she said, and I think you would rather know now. And I think not telling you now when I could would be wrong, in a way I find I care about. He looked at her. Tell me. She took a breath, a deliberate, human-adjacent gesture that he suspected was more habit than biological necessity. The Aravith Cooperative did not respond to your beacon because it is within our response radius, she said. We are not technically in your ICA treaty's designated support zone. We received your beacon because the cooperative has a standing monitoring protocol on that frequency that predates the current treaty, and when the signal came in, it was flagged for assessment. Assessed as what? As a signal of interest, she said carefully. Dr. Holt, the cooperative has known about your research for several years. Your spectral analysis work on the outer merit system, the survey your team was running. He was very still, known about it. The outer merit system contains, she said, certain formations that are of significant scientific interest to the cooperative. Your team's survey data was projected to produce findings that would have implications for our own research programs. She held his gaze. When your beacon activated, it was evaluated by cooperative leadership not only as a rescue priority but as an opportunity. I was deployed because I am the cooperative's best long-range recovery operative, and also because leadership felt I would be well-positioned too. She stopped. He looked at her. To do what? The composure held, but underneath it he could see the effort. To establish rapport, she said, to recover you, to determine whether your survey data survived and could be accessed, and she paused, to assess whether a formal scientific collaboration agreement might be something you would be receptive to. A voluntary one, she added quickly. The cooperative does not engage in coercion, but the framing of the mission included relationship building as an objective. Cashin sat back. The ship hummed around them. The stars moved in the viewports. So I was, he said slowly, a retrieval target. A rescue target, she said. The rescue was real. You needed rescue and you received it. That part was never, she stopped. I want to be precise about this. You were never in any danger from the cooperative. The rescue itself was genuine. But I was also an opportunity. Yes, she held his gaze. Yes, you were also an opportunity. He was quiet for a moment. And you, he asked, were you briefed on all of this before you left? A long pause. Yes. And the rapport building, the observation deck. He wasn't angry, he was careful, the way he was always careful, the way 44 days had sharpened him. How much of that was the mission and how much was you? She looked at him for a very long time. The luminescence along her forearm was doing something he hadn't seen it do before, a slower, more complex pattern, irregular in a way that her regular diagnostics weren't. I cannot truthfully tell you that there was a clear line, she said. The mission framing and my own responses ran in parallel, and I did not separate them because separating them felt. She started again. I should have told you at the beginning that there was a framing beyond the rescue. I recognized that it was not clean not to, but I told myself it was procedural, that it would be handled formally at the station, that it wasn't relevant until then. She held his eyes. That was not fully honest. Why are you telling me now then? Because, she said, I have been reading your register for 4 days and I find that another pause, the longest yet. I find that I care what you think of me, not as an operative. As a person. He looked at her across the fold-down table, in the small common space of a ship called something that finds what is lost, moving through the dark between stars. Is that in your briefing document? He asked. No, she said, it is not. He slept on it. Not the way he'd slept in the early days of recovery, the long unconscious fall of a depleted system restoring itself. He lay in the sleep bay and thought with the deliberateness of someone who had learned, in a dead ship, to give his thoughts proper space. He turned the thing around and looked at it from each angle. The cooperative had sent her with an agenda. That was true. The agenda was not malicious, scientific collaboration, voluntary, properly framed, the kind of thing that happened between institutions regularly and was not inherently problematic. The rescue had been real. He would have died on the Veridine, the air recycler's bad catch getting worse by the week, the rations running toward their end if she hadn't come. She had told him something she hadn't been required to tell him, and had told him because she found that she cared what he thought of her. He lay in the dark and thought about her face when she'd said, I find that I care what you think of me. The composure still there, because the composure was structural. It wasn't a performance she could set aside, but underneath it, very clearly, something that had not been managed into shape. He thought about the observation deck. The way she'd lain on the mattress with her arms at her sides, deliberately, trying to experience the specific quality of watching something that didn't need anything from you. He thought about her voice through the slightly open cockpit door, careful and measured. He thought about the forearm luminescence doing its complex, irregular pattern when she told him the truth. In the morning, he got up and went to the common space. She was there. She looked at him with the stillness of someone who had spent the night in their own careful version of the same exercise. The collaboration, he said, what would it actually look like? A beat, a joint research agreement, your analysis paired with our deep field monitoring data. There's a formal structure. The cooperative has done it before with ICA researchers. It would actually be significant work. A pause. Your spectral analysis method, combined with what we have, the findings would be genuinely important. And what do? He asked. In this arrangement, are you assigned to it? I don't know, she said. I wasn't briefed beyond the mission parameters. Would you want to be? She looked at him for a long moment. That is a question I am not sure I should answer. I'm asking you to answer it. Another long pause. The luminescence ran its complex pattern again. Yes, she said. I would want to be assigned to it, though I recognize that, she stopped. I recognize that my preference is not neutral. That there are reasons to be skeptical of it. I'm not skeptical of it, he said. I want to be very clear about that. She looked at him carefully. You should be, somewhat. I spent 44 days with nothing but time to think about what things are actually worth, he said. I'm fairly clear-sighted about what I'm looking at. He held her gaze. You came through a door when I needed someone to come through a door. You told me something you didn't have to tell me. You lied on a mattress and tried to understand what I meant about the stars. He paused. Those things are real. The briefing document doesn't change them. She was very still. The slow pulse of her augmented eye had shifted to something closer to the complex pattern of the forearm, and he realized, for the first time, looking at it, that this was what her emotional register looked like when she wasn't composing it into stillness, when she let it run. You said, he continued, that some of it is difficult to describe in standard. The functions that process the quality of a situation, not just the data, the emotional register. Yes. What's the quality of this situation, he asked, right now? She looked at him across the fold-down table with her amber eyes and the running light of her honest system. It is, she said carefully, something I don't have an Aravith term for, which means it is genuinely new. A pause. It feels like arriving somewhere I did not expect to be going, and finding that the place suits me. He thought about that. Outside the viewport, the fold space transit had its own light, a wash of something that wasn't quite starlight, the particular ambient quality of space between points, between where you were and where you were going. That's a good description, he said. She was quiet for a moment, and the luminescence ran its complex pattern, the one that appeared when she was not composing herself for an operational purpose, but was simply present in whatever way she was present when no function was being served. What does it feel like for you? She asked. He considered. He owed her the same precision she gave him. Like finding that the count doesn't matter anymore, he said. Not because I stopped, but because something else started. He paused. Velketh, the weight of chosen continuation. I kept making the mark every day not because I thought someone would come exactly, but because choosing daily felt like the right thing to do with the time I had. And then you came. And now the choosing is going towards something rather than just away from the alternative. She was quiet for a long moment. Most people I retrieve, she said slowly, are grateful. Some are grateful in ways that are quite large for a period, and then the gratitude recalibrates as they return to their lives, which is correct, it should recalibrate. The intensity of gratitude in crisis is not a reliable measure of its lasting truth. She paused. I am telling you this because I want to be precise about the fact that I know this, and I have weighed it, and I am not confused about it. I know what rescue gratitude looks like in a register. It has a specific signature. And he said, and yours does not look like that, she said. Or it did initially, as it should. You were relieved and you were grateful, and those were the dominant registers when I first came through the hatch. But they changed over the 2 days on the Veridine. They are still present now in the baseline as they should be, but they are not what I am primarily reading. She looked at him steadily. I want to be clear that I am aware of this, that I have examined it, and that what I said about arriving somewhere that suits me, that is not gratitude. That is something else, something I do not have a prior data point for. Neither do I, he said. She held his gaze. I know, she said, I can read that. Is that strange, he asked, to be able to read it? In this case, she said, and something moved in her expression and she let it move. It is very good. They reached the ICA receiving station on day 6. The station was called Maravath Junction, a mid-sized transit hub on the outer colonial circuit, functional and moderately busy, with the particular quality of places that exist to connect other places rather than to be destinations themselves. Cashin had passed through it twice before and remembered it as neither good nor bad, merely thorough. It was thorough now. The intake protocols were detailed, the medical officer was efficient, the logistical staff were competent and impersonal in the way of people who processed arriving survivors regularly enough to have made their procedures kind without making them slow. The medical review took 2 hours. He was cleared fit, with recommendations for continued metabolic restoration and a follow-up psychological assessment that he agreed to without argument. The formal logging of the Veridine's loss took another hour, a process conducted with a precision he was grateful for, because precision made it a task, and tasks were his preferred way of holding difficult things. He gave the documentation of each crewmate's death the attention it deserved and then let it be recorded, and the record was what remained. A representative from the ICA's research directorate met him for a preliminary debrief, a woman named Orvath, who had the careful sympathy of someone who had been good at her job for a long time and still hadn't found it easy. She told him they were very glad he'd made it. She told him the Veridine's data logs would need to be fully recovered and reviewed. She told him there would be a formal inquiry process, standard procedure. He listened to all of this with the patient steadiness that 44 days had made into a permanent quality of his attention. And then, toward the end, he asked about the Aravath Cooperative's research collaboration request. Orvath looked at him with the mild surprise of someone who hadn't expected that topic yet, and particularly hadn't expected it from a man who had been alone in a dead ship for 6 weeks and had presumably other things on his mind. We've had preliminary contact, she said. If you're receptive, the formal proposal would come through treaty channels. There'd be a review period. These things take time. I'm receptive, Cashin said. Note that. She noted it. He could tell she was curious about why he had raised it, and he let her be curious, because explaining would have required saying things he wasn't ready to say to a debrief officer at Maravath Junction after 2 hours of intake protocols. When he came out of the debrief, she was in the station's transit corridor, standing against the wall in the functional dark suit with the cooperative sigil, the way she stood when she was waiting for something, and not showing that she was waiting for something. She was an excellent operative, which meant she was excellent at not showing things. But he'd spent 6 days reading the thing behind the composure, and he could see that she had stayed. She straightened when she saw him. Your debrief was complete. Yes, he stopped in front of her. You're departing today. My mission is formally complete, she said. Return transit is logged for this afternoon. He looked at her. She was reading his register. He knew she always was, and she would know that the careful steadiness was real, not performed, and she would also know what else was running underneath it. I said I was receptive to the collaboration proposal, he told her. She met his eyes. I know, the debrief is flagged in the cooperative system. Our liaison would have received the notification. Then they'll be in touch. Yes. He held her gaze. And when the formal structure is in place, when the research agreement goes through channels and gets reviewed and comes out the other side, I'm going to ask whether you're assigned to it. The composure held its shape, and inside it the light ran its irregular, honest pattern. I will note that preference on my end, she said carefully, that I am available for the assignment should it be offered. Good, he paused, Sale. She looked at him when he used her personal designation. Something happened in her expression that the composure couldn't quite contain. He'd gotten good at reading the thing that moved underneath it, not because the augmentation told him how, not because he had any extraordinary perception, but because he'd been watching her for 6 days with the full attention of someone who had nothing else to do and had decided this was worth doing. What he saw was not quite hope, and not quite relief, and not quite the specific warmth of something new being treated as though it might last. It was all of those, running together, more complex than any one of them, like the luminescence when it didn't have a name for itself. Thank you, he said, for coming through the door. She was quiet for a moment, the composure steadied not to close something but to hold something. Thank you, she said, for burning the beacon every 12 hours without fail. A pause, and for the tea which was genuinely terrible. It was the worst tea in the outer merit system, he agreed. Almost certainly, the only tea in the outer merit system. That too, he looked at her. Practice Velketh while you're gone, the pronunciation. I want to say it right the next time. She looked at him for a long moment. The complex pattern ran the full length of the luminescence along her forearm, unhurried and honest. I will send you the correct tonal notation, she said, in the data packet. There'll be data packets. The formal mission follow-up requires periodic check-ins with recovered personnel during the review period. She held his gaze. It is standard protocol. And the tonal notation for Velketh is standard protocol. It will be in this case, she said. He held her gaze and she held his, and neither of them said the thing that was underneath all of it, because it didn't need saying yet. And they were both precise enough to know when something needed naming and when it needed time first. What she had said was true. Formal channels moved slowly, and the review period would be its own length, and there were right ways to proceed from a place that was new and worth being careful with. She looked at him with her amber eyes and the light that ran honest and complex in the forearm she wasn't hiding. I will see you in the formal channels, she said. Yes, he said, you will. She walked back toward the cooperative's docking section. He stood in the corridor and watched her go, and she didn't look back, but the luminescence was still running its complex pattern as she turned the corner, visible from where he stood until the last possible moment. 3 months later, an ICA research deputy named Orvath sat across from Cashin at a conference table at the ICA's Outer Systems Research Hub, sliding a bound proposal across the surface. The Aravith Cooperative has formally submitted a joint research agreement, she said. Spectral analysis, deep field monitoring the outer merit system. It's well structured. The legal office has reviewed it. Good, Cashin said, without looking at the proposal. Orvath watched him. You've already read it. The cooperative sent me a courtesy copy. Did they also send you a list of the assigned operatives? He looked at the proposal cover, attached to the back. There had also been, in the 3 months since Maravath Junction, a total of 11 data packets. The first had contained, as promised, the tonal notation for Velketh, formatted with the careful precision of someone who genuinely wanted him to get it right. The subsequent 10 had contained mission follow-up data, as required by protocol, and also other things, observations, precise and brief, about whatever she was between assignments. One had noted a fold transit route that passed through a system with an unusual spectral signature she thought he would find interesting. One had described a star cluster she'd seen through her cockpit viewport during a rest cycle, and said, at the end, in standard that was slightly more careful than her spoken register, "It didn't need anything from me. I thought you would understand this." He had replied to all of them. Orveth paused. "Should I be aware of any prior professional relationship that might affect your objectivity?" Cashin considered the question carefully, in the way he'd learned to consider things, with patience, with honesty, with the understanding that precise answers required proper space. "She found me in a dead ship," he said, "when I had 11 hours of oxygen left and no reason to expect anyone was coming. And she told me something she didn't have to tell me because she found that she cared what I thought of her." He looked up. "That's where it started. I leave it to your judgment where it's going." Orveth looked at him for a long moment. "Sign the agreement, Dr. Holt," she said. He signed it. Outside the window, the stars were doing what they had always done, burning quietly in the dark, needing nothing, available to anyone who wanted to simply look. He'd gotten good at looking. He'd gotten good at a lot of things in the past 3 months, including the correct tonal notation for Velketh, and what an Aravith operative's luminescence looked like when it was running the pattern that meant something genuinely new. He thought he would be doing all of it from here on, with company. That seemed right. That seemed, after everything, after the amber light and the broken stylus, and the sound the recycler made, and the particular quality of a star cluster that didn't need anything, exactly right.